It was embarrassing and humiliating to find out on social media. I'm a friend of Jack Catterall's. Yeah. I was devastated for him.
Must be delighted with this news then, must
you? But the moment I say something, it's going to seem like a jibe at the other promoters. Of course it was a car crash.
Welcome to Talk Boxing with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver. It's part 2 of our chat with the head of boxer, Ben Shalom. Don't forget to like the videos and subscribe to the channel. But let's get straight in. Ben, one of the hot subjects over the last month or so that was dropped on your doorstep, probably you most certainly didn't want, was Amir Khan and the situation surrounding the failed tests and the UKAD involvement and all the structures that UKAD brings to bear. Have you spoken to him recently, Amir?
I've spoken to his wife. I'm good friends with his wife, but not about this situation, if I'm honest. I spoke to his lawyer about this situation, and that was it. But ultimately, you know, what's there to discuss?
Where are we with the situation? Like,
he's banned.
He's banned, isn't he?
He's banned. He's suspended. He's banned.
I'm going to ask you in a minute how you felt that you feel that UKAD. A lot of observations have been made. We've all evaluated the outcome and said that the process works, right? But the timelines are wrong, and they've taken too long to get to this point. And maybe there's a reason behind that. And we'll ask you that in a second. But post every fight, there's a drug test, right? Was it not interesting for you to find out what the result of that drug test was post the fight, just out of curiosity, given you hadn't heard a result?
I think it was one of 5 or 6 tests that Amir will have taken.
Yeah, post fight.
During that few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we notified usually of every single result. And so remember, we're doing tests for almost every fight that we do. And so we're expecting them to come
But you
back.
were testing him because you made this point in various interviews that you've done that he was being prolifically tested. Yeah. He'd made an observation, didn't he, that he hadn't been tested at a certain point. No, and you went, hold on a second, let's get the facts right, let's get the dates of the tests. But educate me or help me, right? This is not a trick question, but it's just a question because I'd like to have it answered. Post the fight, you know there's a test.
Yeah.
But you weren't aware of the result. So when was someone going to ask about the result? When was someone going to say, hold on a second, I'm aware of all the... Because you must have asked.
I'll be honest. No. I'll be honest. I don't chase every test that we do. We're doing hundreds of tests a year. I'm not chasing every test result. When it flags up positive, there's going to be a serious problem and it'll be on my desk. But other than that, I'm not chasing down every test.
I suppose that's
Amir Khan's been a clean athlete his whole career. I'm not concerned about the last tests of about 400 he's had his career. I'm not chasing down the result to get what I would obviously considered to be a negative test, given the fact he was tested twice in fight week and they were negative. Right. And this is both UKAD and VADA. So it was a shock to me, 100%. I think we can debate whether the media should know or I should know or this and that. I think ultimately we've not attempted to put him in the ring. He's not been in danger of getting in the ring, and the suspension's worked, and that's the...
So how do you think, with that in mind, how do you think that UKAD and the board have handled this situation?
I think there's clearly a process problem. It shouldn't be a subjective, shall we tell this person, shall we tell not that person, or whatever. It's clearly a process problem. Right. Whether you fail a test with UKAD, VADA, whoever it is, it's UKAD that should be dealing with it. They should have a process that everyone agrees to. It shouldn't be the board's... In fairness to the board, it's not really that they contract with UKAD to take responsibility. Yeah. It's the board aren't experts in doping and regulation. They employ UKAD to do that, as do most sports in the world, and it belongs to WADA and it's a global authority. I think the process needs to be looked at. Hopefully the whole situation plus the Conor Benn situation is a complete watershed moment for them to sort the process out. Yeah. That's the most disappointing thing. Yes, it was embarrassing.
The time scale.
It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing and humiliating to find out on social media, then be asked and then be told that you should have known. That was hard to take because we've stood so against it, and people will draw their own conclusions, and so that was difficult. But for me, the most important thing is it was dealt with by UKAD. It was dealt with by the right people, and he did receive a strict liability ban. Yeah.
Do you see any differences between the way that the Khan failed test was handled and the Benn failed test seemed to have been handled? Do you see any marked differences between the two?
The difference is UKAD dealt with one and didn't with the other.
Yeah.
If UKAD was dealing with both, then I don't think we'd have had any complaints, or anyone would. That's the only difference that I can see. Confidentialities and who should know and who should that. For me, I think it's almost irrelevant as long as the fight is suspended and isn't allowed in a ring. Yes, it's going to come out once the due process has gone through and all that stuff.
But because of the nature of boxing and because of the circumstances that surround it and because of the allegations that are being made, there is this natural feeling now, a sense of entitlement, I think, from certain parts of the media and subsequently, as a result of that, the public, that the transparency needs to be much clearer and that the coherency behind when people know what they know and how they know. Because I kind of think that when you're talking about medical health, which is what you're doing here, that it actually belongs to certain people to have that information. I wouldn't expect to know your private medical affairs, but there's an assumption that the public should now know the outcomes of these tests. Do you think there needs to be a greater level of transparency, or do you think that the transparency that's here just needs to be slightly widened and slightly more responsive than it currently is?
It's a process that should be transparent, and it's a process should be
By that you mean what?
What happens when a fighter fails a drugs test?
Right.
I think the speed
that
as well,
process
isn't it?
is clear.
The speed
of
of
the
the process.
timelines and everything. Then we shouldn't be talking. This is so easy to really.
To
It's
resolve,
quite
yeah.
an easy regulation duty of the board and UKAD. It should be pretty straightforward, in my opinion. I think it's been a mess because it's not been dealt with UKAD. I think it's been a mess because people can find loopholes.
But UKAD would still have the jurisdiction. I mean, go back to your point, which is that the Benn and Khan tests are slightly different because VADA did the Khan tests, the Benn tests, and UKAD have done the Khan test. But UKAD have jurisdiction over both, don't they? Because under the new rules in September of this year, UKAD had jurisdiction, yet we're finding information leaked into the public domain about Benn that didn't find its way into the public domain about Khan. Isn't that the difference I'm sort of alluding to?
Luckily, the Conor Benn situation got leaked into the public domain, because if it wasn't, he'd have been in a ring.
Yeah.
So ultimately, if UKAD knew about it, he wouldn't have been in a ring. So I think whether it was right or not, it's almost a blessing that it did get, because there's an argument to say he would have ended up in a ring.
Better,
I think there should be a formula around when people know and when they don't. But for me, it's all about process, and it should just be transparent, and we shouldn't be talking about it. If there's any sport in the world that needs serious regulation around doping, it's boxing. And the sophistication around it now is so great that it needs serious attention.
What do you make, in terms of people being able to cycle and find their way around it? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. What do you make of, Conor Benn's in the conversation, so we'll alight upon it. I'm not asking you to necessarily overextend your neck on it, but notwithstanding it, you'll have a view. What did you make of UKAD's statement and decision to ban Conor last week?
It's just overdue. Why weren't they dealing with it in the first place? As you said, there was a September hearing. Of course, he's going to be provisionally suspended if he fails a drugs test. That's an automatic thing. That should just happen regardless. Now it's a case of what the punishment is. And what I would say is I am a Conor Benn fan. And I know it sounds like I'm not, but I am a boxing fan. Conor Benn, how he's developed has been incredible. He's a character for the sport. I think and I feel sorry for him at times, because he's in his mid-20s dealing with all of this, and the PR stuff has been a car crash, and he clearly doesn't have the strategy to deal with it. But ultimately, it should have been taken out of his hands. It should have been dealt with by UKAD, and that's a simple. He can't make all these decisions himself.
As a promoter, would you have done anything different with him?
It's not for a promoter to deal with a failed test. It should have been dealt with by UKAD. I think.
But isn't it okay? Well, is it a promoter's responsibility to be a positive influence and suggesting who we should face,
without a doubt, but
who we should handle it?
The moment I say something, it's going to seem like a jibe at the other promoters. Of course, it was a car crash. I think how can you justify anyone getting in the ring that failed a test? It became an argument, became a debate. It's not even a debate. That's what I found. I find the sport at times and the people that some certain sections of the sport. Almost like what's the word? It's almost archaic in the way, and really cult. There's like this cult element to it, where it's like you're either on this side or the other. You can't see right and wrong. You can't see black and white. Once a fighter fails a drugs test, that's it.
Yeah.
He's suspended and he can't get into the ring. Why would anyone, never mind a promoter, why would anyone, a fan, a person that goes to the shows, a sponsor, anyone, a broadcaster, argue anything different? Why? That's what I don't understand. It's not even an argument, and that's where it's not me pointing fingers. It's not even a debate in my head.
Do you think UKAD are fit for purpose, and I don't mean UKAD in terms of the agency that tests all the other sports, but given the statistics that have come out, right, that showed that last year, or up until 2022, there were 64 out of competition tests, right, for boxing, right, and there were 250 for cycling. Do you think UKAD for boxing, I don't mean UKAD as ad infinitum is a scenario that doesn't work, but for boxing, do you think it works?
No.
I don't think it does.
No, of course it doesn't. Unless UKAD change their approach and realise that boxing should be a high priority on the list, like really, if not the highest priority on the list, and invest more in
that's a funding exercise, isn't it?
Yeah, and the board are able to invest more into it. Again, it goes back to under-regulated and underfunded, and clearly it's not fit for purpose right now. And as you said, it's prevalent clearly in the sport. There is a doping problem in the sport. The fact that
the publicity surrounding this, though, this has got to be the changing of the times. This is a sport. Ultimately, it's a
but isn't that the gift of the British Boxing Board of Control to some extent? Because ultimately, they will be the ones that will be liaising with UK to set the standards that they expect. Right? We expect to see this, right? And what do you need to deliver this for our sports?
Yeah.
And doesn't that come back down to the funding of the British Boxing Board of Control? Is that model changing from you guys contributing as promoters to central contracts paying the British Boxing Board of Control?
I think the board obviously have to. They're the ones contracting UKAD. They should be making sure UKAD do a proper job.
Yeah.
Funding, maybe expertise within the board itself to be able to deliver that message and monitor that message. I know the board feel very let down by UKAD. I know they do.
But how can they? I mean, again, I'm not asking you to be controversial, but I'm trying to just pick beneath the veneer of what we're saying here. It is they that define the standards to some extent. They're engaging with UKAD, right?
Yeah, but they contract to UKAD, who are a very well-respected authority on doping.
So they see the results the same way as I do. Yeah. I can sit here and say, without your level of knowledge, without your level of experience, that 64 out of competition tests being superseded by cycling, and people say there's more cyclists. Yeah, but great, fantastic, but there's more people getting punched in the head in boxing than there is in cycling.
But it goes back to the economics of the sport, and so does everything. There's a reason why certain fighters on an undercard are getting paid £1,000 and some are getting paid £10 million. It's the funding exists in the top 1%. The board aren't anything to do with it, and they're underfunded from a regulatory point of view, from a judging point of view, from a doping point of view, from anything. And that is where it always will come back to. Now, I think doping is going to be such a high priority for the board and for UK going forward that I'm hoping that this is a watershed moment and a huge percentage of whatever funds there are going now to...
Because I'm assuming the one thing that all you three main promoters in the country can agree on is the principle of that doping needs to be dealt with. That this challenge is not going to help the boxing fraternity. It's not going to... we all talk about... in a high tide, all boats rise higher. If you've got a cleaner landscape and a boxing public that trusts the outcome, it's going to be a benefit to you. It's going to be a benefit to Frank. It's going to be a benefit to Eddie, isn't it?
You'd hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
As in, you'd hope everyone is in favour with that. It's a no-brainer. The board. We talked about it before around whether they need contracts with the broadcasters directly or be part of my contracts or be part so that they've
Isn't that happening?
For us, it's going to be happening,
right.
And hopefully it can influence others. I think promoters running this sport is an absolute disaster, and we've seen that they can't behave themselves. And they put everyone in that category. It's an absolute disaster. So you need a controlling authority that can make happen or make things happen, and not be in fear of me turning off the tap. Which is what this. Well,
because I mean, to me, looking at from the outside in, it looks that the structure of boxing in terms of governance is promoters, fighters, media, and right at the bottom, British Boxing Board of Control. And I would assume nobody likes to be told what to do. And I certainly hated it when I was in the Premier League, being told by the Premier League what I could and couldn't do. But I also recognise the value of good governance and good governing bodies.
Governing bodies that don't have commercial interests or can't be compromised commercially. That's the key. We don't want a governing body that decides on who fights who and what happens and this and that. That's when it gets a bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
We want someone
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying about upholding the values of the sport.
Values, medically, doping, judging, regulation, 100%. They need to be completely isolated from any sort of compromised position.
Can you see that happening?
I think we can make it happen, yeah.
We being who?
I think Boxer and Sky Sports united can be influential in this country in making sure that happen.
Interesting. Move on to the next subject, an area that you guys are probably dominating in, which is cruiserweights. You've laid out your framework for this division. You've got some great fights coming up, or you've got a great fight coming up, certainly in a Coley, Chris Smith. I think it's the sort of fight that most people want to see because
good fight.
It's a good fight. How do you see you've alighted upon the cruiserweights? Do you see Riakporhe and do you see Lawrence Okolie translating from cruiserweights into heavyweight? Is that a reasonable pathway, or is the cruiserweight a division that you're comfortable dominating, and see a real opportunity there?
I think both of them are so big now. This is 3 fights left for both of them, I think.
Cruiserweight?
At cruiserweight. I think Lawrence wants to unify, and he's made that clear. He wants to have the Richard Riakporhe fight, so does Richard, and Richard wants to become a world champion. I would say by this time next year, they'll both be at heavyweight.
What would the roadmap be for Richard Riakporhe? Because a lot of people feeling that he should have maybe got the opportunity before Chris Smith because he's beat Chris Smith before.
Let me just take that back for a second.
Richard Riakporhe, in an ideal world, wants to become a world champion before he fights Lawrence Okolie. I think he's going to fight for a world title,
but not against
in the summer. I'm talking very, very soon.
Okay.
And then we'd like, Richard's dream is to go into the Okolie fight on a level playing field and do unification.
Yeah.
Now, whether that can happen or it's high risk, it is what it is. Richard is a fighter that no one wants to fight, and he wants to fight for a world title.
But do you see the ultimate destination in the cruiserweights, with all due respect to Chris Smith, which I'm not making an also-ran in this conversation, but the expectation is Lawrence Okolie wins that fight, certainly from Lawrence Okolie and from your camp, I suspect, and ultimately from the position of making a Riakporhe fight against Okolie. Do you see that fight an ultimate inevitable destiny? And is Richard Riakporhe's journey to have been at the table with Lawrence on an even footing or equal footing Badou Jack?
It's not Badou Jack. Obviously we'd like it to be. I think what we can say is the winner of CBS and Okolie will 95% be fighting Richard Riakporhe this year.
Right.
And so take from that what you will. That fight is a huge domestic fight if it is going to be Okolie Riakporhe. But you can't count out CBS, by the way. Chris Smith in his hometown in Bournemouth.
But you know, and I know that with due respect to Chris Smith, unless there's an absolutely fantastic performance against Lawrence Okolie where he knocks him out inside 6 rounds or something of that nature, the easier sell, the bigger fight, the fight that everyone will be gravitating towards
it's a huge
is obviously Lawrence versus Richard Riakporhe. We've seen the ridiculousness at Creed 3, which you won't have particularly appreciated, I'm sure, but notwithstanding, it still got headlines. Yeah. But do you again, I go back to the point, and maybe you've answered it, but I'll ask it again. Richard Riakporhe wants to be at the table with Lawrence Okolie on an even footing, doesn't he?
He'd like to be a world champion.
Right. So that means in order to make a fight between Riakporhe and Lawrence Okolie, he needs to fight for a world title.
Right.
And you think you can make that fight?
Yes, we do.
And when do you think you can make that fight?
Goulamarian's already in talks. Opataya has only been delayed because of this never-ending purse bid situation with Masternak that should be resolved in the next month. It's been frustrating for Richard. The reason why... But the biggest fight in his eyes is Lawrence Okolie. Yep. If he will be fighting against Lawrence Okolie this year, and in an ideal world,
not if Lawrence Okolie loses to Chris Smith, will he?
You can't rule that out, by the way.
I'm not ruling it out. I'm not ruling it out
last performance and Bellew Smith having that home advantage.
Remember as well, if there's anyone going to beat Lawrence Okolie, it's or knows how to beat him, it's Shane McGuigan.
Yeah.
Last 3 years, he's developed that fighter, knows his weaknesses. I mean, there's no one more vulnerable than you are with your trainer. Yeah. It's complete honesty. But fair play for Lawrence wanting to do this. I think both fighters deserve a lot of credit for this fight. It's going to be a wonderful
And what
fight.
was also quite refreshing, and it's nice to hear, is the elegance in which they both speak about one another. We've had Chris Smith in the studio, we've had Lawrence in the studio. The magnanimity about both of them, obviously, it's business.
Sparred many rounds
together. And there's a respect, and it's nice to see. There's a space for trash talking, I get it, but there's also a space for two gladiators going in there on the back of actually showing the world how it can be done, rather than how we can talk about one another.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've both said, separately, that they both respect each other. and they both know that they're going into a fight that's going to be hard. You know, they know what's on the table, and fair play to them. And fair play to Lawrence Okoli going into Bellew Smith's backyard and the Vitality Stadium.
Be a great atmosphere.
Oh, it'll be absolutely insane. That might be
May 27th.
a massive factor.
May 27th.
Yeah, incredible. And as you said, Lawrence Okoli, 7 weeks later. For me, it's a perfect fight for both of them. Chris Bellew Smith has dreamt of fighting in Bournemouth last year. He never fought in Bournemouth. Now he's fighting at the stadium, and it's for a world title, and it's a domestic world title. It's an incredible British boxing story. The whole place will be completely sold out for Chris Bellew Smith, and Lawrence Okoli is the man to give him an opportunity. And both fighters deserve a lot of credit.
Okay, before we end, there's a couple of fighters that we should talk about. What's the plan for Josh Buatsi?
He's obviously got a tough fight, and it is a tough fight against Paul Stepian very soon, in a couple of weeks. We have to see what's going to happen with the Bivol situation. There's rumours that he'll move down and fight Canelo. Number 1 and number 2 in the WBA are Joshua Buatsi and Dan Aziz.
Yeah.
We would love that for a vacant world title, of course, and so we'll have to monitor that situation. But the yard fight's the one we want to make, and we'd like to make that this year. And so we've got a huge amount of options with Buatsi. It's the light heavyweight division is always almost starting to take shape like the cruiserweight division. 100%. They both want that fight. But it's with Dan Aziz, with Lyndon Arthur, even with Richards, even with Callum Smith. There's huge fights for Mr. Buatsi, and he wants to fight for a world title, don't get me wrong. And if we have to wait for the Bivol fight or the Better BF fight, then we will. But that will just mean that the yard fight comes sooner.
I mean, Buatsi's fighting May the 6th. Is it that he wants a world title fight after that one? Is that like he's getting a bit of rust off and then he wants to go straight into that world title? Is that how soon he wants to move?
Yeah, he does. He wants to fight 3 times this year. He wants to fight for a world title this year. And we have to wait on what happens with Bivol. We expect he might move down to face Canelo, which means number 1 and number 2 with Joshua Buatsi and Dan Aziz.
Do you take any stock by the nature of people's accusations that he's ducked the opportunity to fight Bivol previously?
No, because every fighter that has come across so far, be it Tasha Jonas or Savannah Marshall or even Chris Bellew Smith, has maybe ducked something, or at the time they've had to deal with a lot, and then they've gone on to achieve more than anyone could expect. And I really believe with Joshua Buatsi, we've got a superstar in British boxing, one of the most talented fighters in the sport, and someone that's going to do things that people could not imagine in the next 12 months. And we'll look back and we'll say, that was a complete no-brainer. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
So subject to success in May, which you're obviously planning for, are you saying that the next one out will be Yard?
I'm saying I believe the Anthony Yard fight happens this year.
Right. London?
It's an O2. It's a London fight.
O2. Yeah, absolutely. Just going back a second, because I didn't ask you this. If the Bellew Smith fight goes the way that I anticipate it will, which Okoli wins, and Riakporhe Okoli collide, where would that fight be?
The O2.
The O2. Okay. Jack Catterall, I mean, you must have been slightly pissed off and disappointed to see him going to the zone.
Well, to be honest, Simon,
you've been campaigning for the Catterall fight versus Josh Taylor.
I'm a friend of Jack Catterall's. Yeah. I was devastated for him.
You must be delighted with this news then, mustn't you?
But when I was his promoter, I was never his promoter that first time.
Who needs friends like that, Ben?
No. Don't get me wrong, Simon. We signed him to make the Taylor rematch. Yeah. When that fell out, you have to accept as a business. He spent months asking us for what the alternative plan was, what this. We have commitments, as every broadcaster does, and this sort of old school, this is our stable, that's your stable, is why nothing happens or sometimes happens in boxing. For us, we have certain fighters we have to focus on. We have fighters that we've made commitments to. We've had fighters that we have plans for. For Jack Catterall, we were determined to make sure he got that rematch.
Do you think that's gone now? That ability to fight Josh Taylor's completely gone now?
It's just not the same. It's just not the same. And when there was a fight in between, that was it. And Jack will speak the same. And to be honest, Simon, I was absolutely over the moon that a promoter was willing to give him activity and fights and money because we couldn't. And that's it.
Why
absolutely. Because We have a limited budget, and this goes down to the boring parts. We have a limited budget. We have certain weight divisions we're very strong in, and we have certain plans for certain fighters. The Jack Catterall plan for us was making sure he got that opportunity against Josh Taylor. Once that fell out, it was devastating for him, and he had to find another route. And I was worried.
Because Josh Taylor,
I was worried that he'd end up
Josh
a fighter.
Taylor made the point with, on the show with us repeatedly, got all nasty and snotty about it because I kept on asking the same question: are you going to fight Jack Catterall? And he said, absolutely. I've got a deal with Teofimo Lopez first, right?
Yep, and then he's going to go back into the Catterall
and then I'm
fight.
going to fight Catterall. So if you sit on the sidelines and that fight gets made, I can't imagine you're going to be sitting there with a big plastic grin on your face, are you?
No, but what am I supposed to do? Say to Jack, we don't have anything for you if this fight happens. He's been sat out of the ring 18 months. Like, what are we? I'm not just going to sit on and hope 50% of it. Let him get on with his career. Yeah. And that's the same with Eddie. I just feel like it's the same, for instance, Buatsi and Okoli, and people complain. They fought once in 12 months. If we've got something for them, and it always is different.
That's slightly different with Okoli, wasn't it?
No, but he fought once in 12 months. You might say it's different, but is he getting the activity? Is he getting the love? Is he certain fighters will suit certain places better than others, and we've had it with other fighters. We've had it with other fighters where we just have to say we can't can't do it.
Talking about places and spaces that fit right, you've got Azim and Ben Whittaker. I mean, how excited are you? The right place for those guys? I'm assuming you're going to say yes. And how excited are you for their imminent and immediate and short and long-term futures?
Yeah, our focus is to create box office stars, and we think there's nowhere better than to become a box office star. And so we're looking out for talent that is so unique, that can attract the masses to the sport, that can make the sport big. That's what Amir Khan did. That's what Naseem Hamed did. Yep. That's what these big names like Chris Eubank did.
They've got crossover personalities, haven't they?
These two guys can break barriers and become box office stars, and we feel like we've got the two gems in British boxing with those two. Azim is moving like a rocket.
Yep.
And Ben Whittaker's been injured, and it's almost like getting a new signing on May the 6th. But those are the fighters where we can present a huge long-term plan, and for us are very important for British boxing. Without your superstars, and especially when we're seeing Anthony Joshua come to the end, we're seeing Kell Brook, Amir Khan, Tyson Fury perhaps towards the latter end. Who are the new stars? Who are the guys that are going to carry the sport forward? And we think those two can be front and centre. When
you look at the marketing of these two guys, because like I just made an observation, they've got crossover abilities, haven't they? They've got abilities to be in the mainstream and to find themselves with all kinds of endorsements left, right and centre because of the manner in which they operate, the style of the way they fight, but also the look and feel of them. Do you look at the YouTube element of the world and looking at the successes that they're doing in the digital world and say, we as a promoter have got to embrace some of the thinking that the KSIs and the Jake Pauls have adopted, whether we like what they represent, their ability to digitally integrate and make people cross over into other opportunities are interesting, aren't they?
They are, but I will say...
they're starting to fail a little bit, with this Misfits boxing and what happened the other night.
I will say,
and whatnot.
Just what Spencer's saying, there's a fine balance. We've always had characters in boxing. Look at Naseem Hamed and look at Chris Eubank Sr. For me, the awe...
But we've never had a landscape like now that we've got with social media being so prevalent.
But for me, the awe is... And these guys are the greatest fighters on the planet. That's what, for me, boxing represents.
I agree.
And I'm not saying I'm against it, and there's definitely elements all fighters should consider, particularly those that aren't that. But for me, that's why this sport is so... He sort of creates so much feeling amongst people and is related around the world, is that not only can these guys be charismatic and be superstars outside of the ring, but they are absolute killers inside the ring. And that's what makes this sport so great.
One of the highlights last year, and I was fortunate enough to be at it because I saw the event itself and all its spectacle and all its pomp, was Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall. Do you have anything up your sleeve similar for this year?
Yeah, we'd like to. It was such a success for us. It was a breakthrough moment. It was the first women's night. It was a good undercard as well. It was incredible, and the crowd was different. Everything was different. I think the sport. Certain fans laugh at women's boxing, and I still don't get it, because women's boxing is almost the perfect antidote to the drug stuff that we have to deal with and the regulation in terms of making the sport bigger and more well received and more transparent. Boxing's always had this dark ages, murky tone to it, and you go to events and it's too intimidating for certain audiences. That night changed it completely on its head, and it showed how beautiful this sport is, and it showed how much integrity the fighters have. And women's boxing is still in that phase where the fighters are so grateful to just be fighting for opportunities, and they fight for more than themselves. I get so much enjoyment out of women's boxing. I think what Tasha Jonas did last year, the fact that we've now got our first British women's title as well. Lauren Price will fight for that in the Birmingham show on May the 6th. It's going from strength to strength, and it's a welcome addition to the sport. And it's it's definitely helping the sport in terms of attracting the broadcasters, attracting new fans.
So I suppose the final question I have for you is two-parted. It's an overused expression, but next gen. Right? But do you consider yourself to be that in the promoter stratosphere in terms of the next generation of broadcaster? And following on from that, once you've answered that, if you can look at the next 24 months for Boxer, where are you going? What does the landscape look like for you? And where do you expect to be in 2 years' time?
Do we see ourselves as next gen? I just think because I'm of a certain generation,
a certain age,
I just think we just think differently. We just have a different view
vision,
of things. And I'm always told and always been, this isn't the way it's done, son.
Yeah.
All the time. And I'm
Does that annoy you?
It almost spurs me on a little bit because we'll make mistakes.
You accept there's an orthodox. I mean, when I bought Palace, again, I'm not going to talk over you and your subject matter. I was 31, and I was told constantly and repeatedly, it's not the way you do it, son. Right? And I used to sit there going, well, that's great, but maybe things need to change. There is an orthodoxy. There is a set of protocols that probably need to be observed to some extent. Yeah. But going back to the question,
the fact that
you don't think of yourself that way.
The fact that we want to work with other promoters, and the fact that we don't, it's not all about profits, and the fact that you can't really understand why we would let Jack Catterall go or things like that. It's amazing to us that it's almost when you say that to people involved in boxing, it's almost like they can't comprehend it, and therefore you're an idiot. You're an idiot for even thinking it can be done like that. Luckily, we're in a position now where perhaps we can influence, but for us, it's to try and change if we can just influence 20% the way promoters interact with each other and the way the sport is viewed upon and the way the sport grows and the way it's
you're a moral crusader.
No, but it's not about that, Simon. It's about the fact that for so long as a fan you're frustrated by this sport, and I'm not saying we can solve everything, and I know it takes a lot of time, but that is our genuine focus and we think that's our USP, is that we do see
finding solutions, not problems.
We see the sport differently, and that's it. And because we want to be here for the long term, we care about the sport for the long term.
Yeah.
We don't need to make short-term decisions. In 2 years, I don't want to say I think we'll be the number one place in the UK, because again it goes back to the fact that that's going to piss other
people benchmarks, right? You're going to want a marquee heavyweight, right? You're going to want to be in a certain situation.
I think our stars will have come through that by now. I think our stable and the fighters under it will be the most well-known in the UK, and that's all I can say. I think they'll be the flag bearers of the sport.
And internationally?
And I think they will. And internationally, of course.
I think you've got the depth of talent with the young kids that are coming through, haven't you? Like the names you've mentioned, Adam Azim's, Ben Whittaker's. Like, in 2 years' time, they'll be at a level. You ain't going to be able to hold them back. Ben Whittaker and Adam Azim, two prime examples. In 2 years' time, they will be fighting for good titles because they're that good. If you're good enough, you're old enough.
The guys coming through for me, that's in 2 years' time, as I say, I think we'll have the best stable. Does that mean other promoters won't exist? Of course not. They need to exist, and there's so many talented fighters that you can't look after everyone.
So you're building the foundations for a very solid assault upon the boxing landscape, aren't you?
Assault, I guess so. I guess we're thinking long term, and we would tilt. Should
we use tilt then, if you don't like the word assault? Right. That's it for episode 22 of Talk Boxing. Ben, thank you for joining us. Been lovely to see you and very insightful. Learned lots, haven't we, Spencer?
Bundles.
Albeit our knowledge level was low anyway. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing and watching the videos, and we'll see you next week.